On this episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast, we will be discussing best practices for softball pitching arm care. Welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast, your place to come and get answers to your athletic development questions. We cover a range of topics, all related to helping you to achieve your athletic goals so that you can experience and enjoy the athletic career that you deserve. I am your host, Dr. Mike Matthews. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Athletic Potential Podcast. So excited to be back, excited for what we'll be accomplishing with these podcasts. As mentioned in a previous podcast, our goal with this podcast moving forward is to provide more of an in-depth, research, evidence-based attempt to answer a lot of the questions that we've been getting. We'll still do question and answers occasionally with different episodes, but a lot of times we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into what a lot of the research says, or maybe the key articles say about the topics and about the questions that we are getting. And today is one of those episodes. A question I get constantly from the softball community is essentially, hey, what we hear all about arm care for baseball players and really throwers in general. And they are asking, in regards to the softball pitcher, since it's such a different motion, is it a different arm care program? And if so, what is the best arm care, or what should we be doing for the pitchers in softball? Now, today I'd like to answer this question, and I'd like to answer it in a way that we're going to cover two articles, okay? Two different articles that are in the research that I feel like cover this topic fairly well. One of them is an oldie but a goodie, and the other one is a little bit more recent. Now, there are just a tremendous amount of literature out there in regards to uh, the biomechanics of the softball windmill pitch, of the muscles used during these activities, and then suggestions are given on from each one of those articles about how to train it and those type of things. So, what I would like to do first is use baseball throwing as a bit of a comparison. And if you don't know much about the baseball throw or the pitch in regards to baseball, that's okay. You'll still be able to derive the concepts and the key concepts that I'd like to get out of this episode in regards to the windmill or softball fast pitch. So let me start with this. When it comes to arm care in baseball players, there's two things, well, really three things that we are looking for to improve in the muscles that are responsible for the shoulder and the elbow. First, as you're trying to improve peak force. Peak force is a fancy word, or can be synonymous with the use of strength. How strong can you contract the muscle? And we use peak force as a measure. It's something that can be readily measured in clinic. There's a lot of different devices out there between force plates, intensiometers, and all sorts of handheld dynamometers, those type of things. It is a great way to test or to determine if the muscle is actually strong enough to be able to withstand the rigors of the overhead baseball throwing motion. So it's something we definitely test for in the baseball players. And realistically, we have enough data now to suggest like standards for these type of things as well. And the other thing we always look at with peak force is a progression. Are they getting stronger? Are their numbers higher than they were before? Uh, there's um, there's companies out there that are measuring peak force and using it to make decisions on whether or not an athlete, it would be a good idea for an athlete to go back out and pitch again, looking at fatigue levels and those type of things. And this is good data. Now, the reason I bring this up, again, we're talking about three things. Peak force is one. The second is endurance. So to be able to test how, out of the contractions a muscle can make, how many contractions can it make without substantially decreasing in its peak force. So that's the second thing we look at. And now the third thing we look at is generalized, is essentially a power output. How much force can be used over a certain amount of time, which is essentially power. And those are the three things that, when we're talking about arm care and those type of things, we want to maintain and or improve those three variables. Now, in regards to baseball, the more the better is essentially what it is, right? Now, and this is where it's going to deviate a little bit from the softball windmill pitches. If you look at the throwing motion in baseball, there are forces being produced to accelerate the ball, and there are forces that are used to decelerate the arm after the ball has been released and thrown to home plate or wherever it's going. And in regards to arm care in baseball, the decelerators need to be trained differently than the accelerators, and you have to train them in different ways. Meaning, um, the type of position that you would use, the type of muscle contraction, concentric, isometric, eccentric, the type of speed of that contraction, ballistic or slow or somewhere in between, and then how long are you holding those contractions for, how many reps, all those things are played into this. Now, there are the rotator cuff. Is essentially four muscles that surround the shoulder. They keep the ball in the middle of the socket. They are very, very important for the overhead thrower. If those don't work right, the ball is going to shift and move around in the socket, cause stress and cause problems. And so when we are training our baseball players, we want those cuff muscles to be as strong as possible, to coordinate and work together as best as possible, as well as to have good endurance and to be able to fire quickly and strong and have good power. And when we are training them, their predominant use of throwing is when the baseball player is essentially going and bringing the arm back into late cocking or full external rotation and layback. The whole job of the rotator cuff is to hold the ball in the middle of the socket and then allow it to rotate very quickly. Once the ball is out of the hand, the rotator cuff's entire job is to keep the arm from ripping off and going to home plate. So it's a decelerator. They're all trying to hold on to this arm. And those are what we call eccentric or lengthening muscle contractions. And so when you train arm care for baseball players, you have to take that into consideration so that when you do train them, that they can handle eccentric stress and not concentric or just shortening stress or force producing stress in regards to accelerating the arm. Now, let's go back to the windmill pitch for softballers. If you look at the windmill pitch, and obviously it's completely different, it's thrown underhand, the motions are different, all things are a lot different. The rotator cuff functions much the same during the windmill pitch. As the arm is brought forward and then up and over the top, the predominant job of the rotator cuff muscles in this motion is to center the ball in the middle of the socket. That's the good news. So that's roughly the same, although the motions are totally different and play into what we were going to talk about of what's best case for arm care for softballers. Okay. Now, rotator cuff is supposed to center the ball in the middle of the socket, and it does that throughout all the motions. Now, when the ball is released, ball's down to the side, the forearm comes in contact with the thigh or the hip region on the softball pitcher. The ball is released. What we notice is that the rotator cuff really almost does nothing in way of deceleration of the arm. The impact of the arm on the side of the body is really what decelerates the ball or decelerates the arm from moving forward and continuing. And so we don't need to train the rotator cuff muscles for the eccentric stress, although I will tell you that most often than not, we do still train it because there is advantages outside of just the throwing motion to a strong eccentric contraction in the rotator cuff. But we don't have to train them like the baseball players do, mainly because of that. All right. The deceleration of the pitching motion is stopped at the thigh. And this is where I'm going to bring in the first article. Okay. So now this article was conducted by Oliver et al. So a bunch of other authors, and I believe James Andrews was on this study as well, predominant surgeon, a big name in the sports medicine world. But this was back in, and I apologize. This is actually the more recent study. So I'm a little out of order. I thought I was going to go with the other study first, but here, we'll go after this. So this is a study done by Oliver et al. And they did this study in June of 2018. What they did is they took 23 softball pitchers, and these were youth, so 11 to 15 years old. They were on average about 5 feet tall, weighed about 110 pounds. And what they did is they put markers on it. You've all seen it, little balls on different parts of the body. And then they have motion captures. They have cameras that watch these and pinpoint these markers in space, and then go back and make 3D models and measure how fast each one moves relative to another and all those type of things. And so what they did is they put these markers on these youth. They had them warm up, and then they had them throw 3 essentially max effort fastballs. So just trying to go for velo here. So they're trying to throw the ball hard and see what happens. Okay. And the average fastball velocity for this group, these 23 softball pitchers, was right around 40 miles an hour. And what they found was they were looking for correlations in certain type of mechanics with an increase in throwing velocity. And what they found that there were basically three things that really mattered on the girls that could throw harder. And now this is in biomechanics. We'll talk about a little bit more of a few other things, okay, in just a second. But biomechanics wise, depending on what they call it trunk flexion. So as the ball comes out of the hand, the position of their trunk relative to their body. If they had increased trunk flexion, you threw faster. If you had increased trunk rotation at a certain phase of the throw, you threw at higher velocities. And if you had a certain amount of lateral trunk flexion, which is essentially like a side bend, then you threw at higher velocities. Now, the other thing to look at is, as you would expect, the older and the taller athletes in this group threw harder. Good news, if you get taller and you get older, you're more than likely going to see a velocity increase so long as your biomechanics are efficient. Now, one of the things that I get asked all the time is like, well, as these pitchers, they come out and they stride forward, we really need to get them as far forward as possible because these really big stride lengths increase to more throwing velocity. And the answer is maybe. This study basically said, look, we looked at stride length and it was not correlated in these 23, 11 to 15-year-old softball players for an increase in velocity. So you don't really need it. And what they found also when they looked at this is a lot of people think that you need to get your arms really strong so when you come up and around, you can really pull down and get in through the pitch. Now, although that intuitively kind of makes a lot of sense, what we did realize in this study is that 63 to 74% of the kinetic energy came from the lower extremity and trunk, which means the power, the energy needed to take the ball and accelerate at 40 miles an hour in this study at home plate really originated from the legs and the trunk. Okay, now remember that because that is going to be a big deal when we start talking about the exercises that need to be used to basically facilitate increases in velocity, increases in performance, as well as decrease injury risk over time. Okay. So let's see. And the other thing that we pulled out of the study that I found was a little bit interesting was this, and that is that 61% of the stride length was the average for the highest throwing velocity. So they are striding out at 61% of their body height. So if you need to use something to say, oh, is my daughter or is my player or whoever, are they striding at an appropriate length? Then you can kind of say, all right, what's 60% of their body height? Get an idea. And if they're close to that, this study would indicate that's probably in a pretty good range. Now, I know there's different schools of thought. Some people want to stride further. Some people want to stop faster. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I'm simply saying and giving the results of this study that was done in 2018. Now, my main takeaway from this study was when reading this, and the reason I bring it up in regards to arm care for softball pitchers is this. The study basically said in regards to throwing a softball hard, that a strong lower half coordinated over a stable and a statically stable but also dynamically stable pelvis and lumbar spine showed the greatest increase in velocities. Now, a bunch of works, all this kind of stuff, basically said this: if you can't control your core and your pelvis, then you can't use the power in your legs. And if you don't have much power in your legs, then you're going to lose out. So you need good, strong legs, and you need to be able to control the position of your body at your pelvis and your lower back. If you don't have those two, then your likelihood of being able to throw hard as a pitcher goes down. So you'll see that when it comes into play of what we're talking about in regards to arm care, which I'm going to soon call body care for our softball pitchers. Okay. All right, so now we're going to jump to another study here. This study is, I really thought this study was done very well. This is, for those that know me and worked with me in the past or have heard me talk about it, we've been using EMG. It's essentially looking at the electrical activity of a muscle over the past 2 years here at Athletic Potential, and has been a game changer at making sure that our athletes get back quickly to their sport after an injury, but also making sure that they are at optimal levels prior to starting a season. So, sorry, let me grab a drink. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me talk about this study. This is the oldie but goodie study. This was done back in 1997 by, I believe it's Maffett or Maffei, not sure. Sorry if I butchered that. But they looked at the EMG or the electrical activity of select muscles in the shoulder of softball pitchers during each phase of the pitch. Now, for those that don't want the full technicality of this, I apologize, but I am going to go through the phases. But there are essentially 6 phases of the softball pitch. There's the windup, which is what you would normally see people standing. The girls will be standing on the mound. They're going to rock back, and as they come forward, that is the windup. So the arm goes down. So the throwing arm goes down to 6 o'clock. So it's the arm of the body, and then arm going down to 6 o'clock. The body is starting to move forward. Now, so that's phase 1. Phase 2 is they go from arm at 6 o'clock, which is pointing straight to the ground, and then arm comes up to 3 o'clock. So that's where you see both arms are pointing towards home plate. At that point, they're starting to move forward towards home plate. Then you have from 3 to 12 o'clock, which is arms straight out. Arms straight up, they're starting to separate. You're starting to see a little bit of trunk rotation. You're starting to see hips open up just a little bit, just to kind of give the space of the body some room to move. That's 3 to 12. Then you have 12 to 9, which is the arms coming down from the 12 o'clock position, coming behind them. And then you have 9 o'clock to the body, where the ball or the arm hits the side of the body, and that's at ball release. And then you have what we call follow through. This is essentially the finish of the motion. Those are the 6 phases. Now, again, you don't have to necessarily remember all of those phases, but what they did in this study is they took I believe it was, let me look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 muscles. They put kind of a crazy study in the fact that they did this, but they took these little flexible needles, and they took these needles and they put them in to the muscles they wanted to study. And then they had these pitchers pitch, throw so many throws. And I didn't write that down because I felt like it was enough. But then they had them throw with these things in them and see how much electrical activity actually happened. Now, that being said, I know I got a lot of people that always say like, well, I wouldn't throw the same if I had a bunch of needles in me. I'm like, the answer is okay, yeah, but this is good stuff in the sense that the motion is the same. And yes, their outcomes are probably less than they would have if they didn't have needles in them, but the motions were the same. And so we can look for trends at muscles of increasing EMG at certain phases, which will allow us to then be better able to prescribe correct exercises based on the demands, the position, and the muscle contraction type of the muscle study. So here are the muscles they looked at. They looked at the anterior delt, which is the muscle that lives on the front side of the shoulder. It's the delt muscles. It's the cap over the shoulder. They looked at the supraspinatus, which is a rotator cuff muscle, then infraspinatus, which is a rotator cuff muscle. The posterior delt, so the cap on the back side of the shoulder. They looked at the teres minor, also a rotator cuff muscle. They looked at the pec major in the front. They looked at the subscapularis, which is also a rotator cuff muscle. There's 4 of them if you're wondering. There's 4, right? And then the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior is a big muscle that lives on the inside up against our rib cage. You actually don't see this one hardly at all. If you've got somebody who's fairly lean, it looks like little striations, a little like a feather on the inside of the rib cage. Probably one of my favorite muscles of the body and what it can do. And it's quite large. Okay. So they looked at these 8 muscles in these 6 phases of the throw and then said, okay, well, so what? Like, what muscles were used the most? What was the most important muscle of these 8 muscles that we looked at? At what phase was it the most used? And what they were able to determine is essentially 6 things that I took away from this study that I think we all need to know. And the first is, when a pitcher is pitching, a lot of times you see these motions where you feel like they're in these extreme ranges. Like arms are way far back, arms are way far forward, right? And what they found was when they actually looked at these, that most of it always happened what they call the plane of the body. Now, if you were to just stand, we talk about the plane of the body. If you were to stand and then just raise your arm up, I just said, hey, raise your arm up. Most people would raise their arm up in a way that's not straight ahead and it's not straight across, like straight out to the side. It's somewhere in the middle. We call that the plane of the body. Okay. Now, the motion of the pitching happens in the plane of the body. And that's important for a couple different reasons. And the main reason with that is when it happens in the plane of the body, the rotator cuff is better able to center the ball in the socket. So remember, we were talking about the rotator cuff's main job is to take the ball and put it in the middle of the socket and keep it there. So as the arm's coming up and over in different phases of the throw, the rotator cuff is more optimally positioned if it all happens in the plane of the body. So when we say that, again, all of this is to help design exercises or movements or positions that are going to allow for these pitchers to continue to pitch at higher performance levels as well as injury free for longer, right? So when we talk about doing exercises, we don't need to worry about getting to these extreme ranges of the shoulder. We don't have to go all the way to the back into this what we call the frontal plane, which is kind of further away. We don't have to go into the sagittal plane, which is directly in front of us. We don't have to get into these crazy positions. We need to train in different positions of the plane of the body. And so you'll see that when we get to the exercise program side of this. Okay. So that's the first thing. Everything happens in the plane of the body. We should train in the plane of the body. However, that's the next thing. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get to this. And that is in regards to when we talk about the plane of the body, so which is your ability to stay in this kind of specific zone, is affected by two things predominantly when we're talking about the shoulder blade and the shoulder. The first is posture. I know everybody's like, here we go, posture, right? Posture is huge here because the way that the shoulder blade will move is all dictated based on the ribs, and the ribs are connected to the spine. And if the spine's in a certain position, it's going to cause the ribs to be in a certain position, which is then going to cause the shoulder blade to be in a certain position and then force the shoulder through certain positions. So if you do not work, and this is getting to the thing here is, if you do not work what we call proximal center to distal, meaning further away from the body, then you're running into problems here. Okay. You have to work proximal to distal. And so when we talk about arm care, body care, because we're going to get to body care, number one thing you'll see the first exercise that I want to give out is a postural based exercise. We've got to establish what we consider more of a normal posture for softball pitchers. If they are already in a big forward head position, or maybe they're really flat in their spine, we're going to run into some problems. We have to take care of posture and we have to take care of rib position. Okay. So that's the second thing. Now, third thing from this study that I like to pull out is the main power producer in these 8 muscles that they looked at, okay, was the pec major. As the arm comes up over here, the pec is actually fairly deactivated. There's not a lot of electrical activity as the arm comes up into that 12 o'clock position. But as soon as it starts coming down and they bring the arm down, okay, that pec starts to fire more and more and more and more until it gets right to the edge of the body. When it's usually EMG is from the 9 to the release position was the highest EMG for the pec, if I remember right. Yes. And that is what that's the power producing part of the shoulder in regards to the throwing motion. Now, I'm going to say this because everyone's going to be like, oh, we got to go out and get big pecs. We got to go out and work our pecs, right? Because that's going to get us to throw harder. You got to remember from the previous study, right? Let me go back. 63 to 74% of the energy used during the pitch came from the lower half and the trunk. So your pec, if we just said and the pec was the only thing producing force in the upper half, your pec would only contribute at most 26%. Okay, really? I mean, 26, maybe 30. What is the other? I mean, you could do some 37%. And I can tell you right now, if it's producing 37%, we won't be pitching for very long. Okay. There's problems with that. But we're talking, this isn't producing all the force. So don't go out and start shooting for pec, stronger and tougher pecs. That is good. But you'll see there's a certain way to train the muscle itself to enhance the power output without restricting any mobility, which is a big problem. Okay. So remember, the pec is the primary power producer of the shoulder muscle group. Okay. According to this study. Now that's important because it definitely tells us we have to train the pecs. A lot of times what I see with softballers is they don't train their pecs very well, because one thing I hear is always, oh, if you train the pecs, you're going to lose mobility. And the answer is yes, you will, if you train the pecs incorrectly. If you train them correctly, you'll only enhance the mobility and you'll enhance your power output. By the way, power output's a fun way to say also stability of the shoulder, which means less stress at the shoulder joint, which means less pain potentially in the future or injury risk. So you definitely have to train the pecs, but you have to train them in a specific way. And we'll give you at least one exercise for that today. All right. So that was the third thing. The fourth thing is in regards to the pitching motion in softball, the number one stress that produces potential injury risk for the shoulder is distraction. So it's the shoulder, it's the ball and socket trying to be pulled apart in different phases of the throw, and predominantly as the arm comes down, you're getting tremendous amount of distraction forces. Okay. And so those are a big, big deal. And so when we talk about distraction forces, the muscles that restrict or reduce distraction at the shoulder joint are the rotator cuff. Okay. So we have to train the rotator cuff to be able to hold a position for as long as possible at high intensities or high speeds. Now, there's specific ways you can train the rotator cuff that are better than others for this purpose. And we are going to go ahead and give you at least one exercise for that today as well. Okay. So that was 4. 5. Okay. We talked about this already, but this is pulled out of this study. If you look at every one of these muscle groups, they look at it, and we look at it at the follow-through phase. The follow-through phase, so it's the ball is now out of the hands. If you look in the baseball studies, you would see massive increases in the EMG and rotator cuff muscles and in the lat. And what we see in this study of all these muscles that we're looking at, we look at it, and all of them indicate very low EMGs, if maybe a moderate EMG for one muscle, and that is your serratus anterior. Okay. But realistically, deceleration in the throwing motion is not something that we have to train for extensively like we do in the baseball throwing motion. Do we train for it? 100%. Why? 2 reasons. 1, because if you do anything that anything that is used in the shoulder to decelerate, the windmill pitch is always going to be helpful. And 2, they're not just throwing underhand, right? They're going to maybe have to field the ball and then throw an overhand throw to first base. So yes, we need some degree of eccentric control of the rotator cuff in these athletes. They may be pitchers, but a lot of times they're going to have to pick up a ball and they're going to have to throw it overhand somewhere. Okay. So that's the other reason why. All right. 6th, last thing, takeaways from this study is that we're always going to try and train a lot of these muscles in an isometric or a concentric fashion. If you look through this study, an eccentric contraction was used in a lot of these muscles, but the difference is that those eccentric contractions were at the phases of they were at phases of moderate intensity or moderate stress on the shoulder. So what we really need to do is teach these muscles to flex really hard at certain positions, but also teach these muscles that when they are asked to produce force of some kind, they can produce that force in a shortening position. Now, I will tell you this, I don't like training muscles in one phase. I don't like only doing concentric or eccentric or isometric. I train everything in all 3 phases because there's benefit. Okay. Now, when I say that but what we're going to do is prioritize our exercise selection to target isometric and concentric with some eccentrics built in. And we kind of, I hate to use the word cheat, but we kind of cheat with eccentrics. We actually use power and ballistic movements to train our eccentric control. So we get basically the best of both worlds in a lot of these muscle contractions with that. Okay. So that's kind of a fun EMG study that was actually very insightful in regards to the muscles of the shoulder. That's what everybody talks about. Arm care, it's shoulder strengthening exercises, those type of things. Okay. Now we've talked about body care. I keep using the word body care. The phrase body care, because it is body care. We need to make sure that we're taking care of not just the shoulder, but other aspects of of the body. So here's one more. Let me pull up one more study here. This study was done by Oliver. I believe it might have been the same researcher, Oliver, different study. Okay. And this was in 2020. And what this researcher looked at is what they call the long head of the biceps tendon. Okay. So biceps, bi means 2, ceps means head. Okay. So when you flex your gun, right, you got a bicep. There's 2 heads to it. You can see it. If you flex it, there's a little deviation right at the top. You're going to see one part of deviation kind of go towards the front side of your shoulder, and then the other one is going to kind of just go straight into the shoulder. When we talk about the long head of the biceps tendon, there's 2 tendons that come off. There's one tendon that comes off into the front, attaches into the bony structure right in the front of your arm. If you hit it just right, it doesn't feel good. That's where one tendon comes in, and then the other tendon comes up and over the top of the shoulder and dives deep into the shoulder. That is the long head of the biceps tendon. Now, why are we talking about this in softballers? Okay. Baseball players have this issue when they come up overhead and they go lay back. That long head of the biceps tendon gets really, really tractioned or tensioned and can cause some problems. Okay. Now, softballers, they're not going overhead with these throws, right? As they come underneath and come through here, come underneath and down into that side position. they still get a fair amount of biceps tendon stress. Remember, we talked about number one force, according to some of the research studies, that is imparted on the shoulder during the windmill softball pitch is distraction. So the arm is literally, as you're coming down, is trying to rip off and go to the floor. Well, guess what helps to withstand some of that? Your rotator cuff, yes, but the long head of the bicep is also a part of that. Because remember, as you're coming up and over, you're holding a ball, your arm's going into flexion, it's kind of staying there so the biceps flex, and as you come through, it stops. If the rest of the muscles of the shoulder are not doing their job, the long head of the bicep is going to have to make up for it. Now, it is not designed to take the stress like the rotator cuff is. So it's only going to take the stress every so often. If it takes it more than that, it's going to react negatively and you're going to get issues. Okay. Tendonitis, tears, those kind of things all happen. We've seen that in a lot of the athletes, unfortunately. Now, I bring that up, so that makes sense. So get your rotator cuff strong. Well, we'll talk about that. And the last study indicated that that was probably a good idea, right? But here's the thing I wanted to pull out of this study by Oliver, okay, in 2020, is this. What they found was that the position of the trunk, your body relative to the ball at certain phases of the pitch, predominantly at ball release, increase stress and demands on the biceps tendon over the rotator cuff. Basically, what happens is if you are at a position or in a disadvantageous trunk position compared to the shoulder, the biceps tendon is going to have to take more stress. So here, we're going to bring it back around. All right. Now I'm picking on the biceps tendon mainly because we see a lot of bicep tendon injuries in some of these athletes. Okay. And so I only bring it up because there's enough studies out there to indicate that there's an injury risk here. And how do you get rid of it? Well, we don't want this to happen. It has something to do with shoulder strength, but what it really has something to do about is trunk positioning. And if we talk about trunk positioning, we're talking about core strength, endurance, and awareness, as well as pelvic positioning. So now we're back to the pelvis again, right? So now you can see why we call it body awareness. Realistically, and this is something I think we need to take away from this episode is if you want your softball athlete or you're the softball athlete, if you want to stay healthy, you really, really have to do three things. Okay. And we're getting into the nitty gritties here. Okay. Three things. First, you have to improve your posture to the point where it is as good as it possibly can be. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean like perfect textbook here, right? Everybody has their own and unique postures, and some postures actually are better than others for throwing softballs. However, some postures are worse than others for throwing softballs. So what you need to do is be able to find the correct posture for you. Sometimes that's hard, sometimes it's not. Okay. But you've got to find a more pristine posture. So that's the first thing. The second thing you have to do is you have to be able to move your pelvis. Okay. So we talk about like the pelvis, if you put your hands on your hips, your hands are actually on your pelvis. And imagine that's a bucket, right? So you're holding the bucket with your hands, right? So if those are watching, I'm holding my hand with the bucket, right? So if I hold my hands with the bucket, you have to be able to essentially, if there's water in this bucket, you have to be able to pour water out the front, pour water out the back. Okay. And you have to be able to rotate the bucket without spilling water. If you can do that, you're in good shape with lumbopelvic control or pelvic control, right? So you got to be able to tilt the pelvis forward, dump water out the front, tilt the pelvis back, okay, dump water out the back, and then rotate the pelvis without dumping water. If you can do that, then we're in a pretty good position to say that you have decent lumbopelvic control to the point where you can, as you go and pitch, you'll have some awareness, if not good awareness, to control the positions. And remember, if you control trunk position and pelvic position, you can use the power in your legs, which will decrease the stress on your arm and allow you to pitch more often and at higher performances. Okay. And if you have good pelvic control, then it also will decrease the stress on the main areas of the shoulder, predominantly the front side of the shoulder, the biceps tendon, of getting increases stress and essentially could cause problems. So that's the second thing. So we talked about posture, we talked about pelvic control, right? The third thing is your ability to control your shoulder blade on your rib cage in every phase of the throw. Now, a lot of people will be like, what? Like, what the heck does that mean? And the answer is, it is like so hard to explain. Okay. The good news is I don't have to be like, you're going through the motion, like, oh, you lost it. Oh, you're going to go to pitch. Oh, you lost it again. That's not how this works. How it works is much like the pelvis, and that you're supposed to dump water out the front, dump water out the back, rotate to one side, rotate the other without losing water. Okay. With the shoulder blade, you have to be able to show as you reach your arm up overhead, the shoulder blade can get to certain positions. Okay. Essentially, that the shoulder blade rotates up and goes up and out. Okay. Now, there's ways to see this, and that's probably a whole podcast episode on its own. But if you can demonstrate to put your shoulder blade exactly where it's supposed to be with your arm overhead, and then when you come back and put the arm back at your side, if the shoulder blade settles and sits in the position it should, then you should be just fine. Okay. Then it sounds like you can coordinate the movement of your shoulder blade, which means as you go in to those positions to throw the windmill pitch and the softball pitch, your shoulder blade will be coordinating all of it. Because what we found in the research, and this is in a different study that I did not include today, mainly because of how technical it was, but realistically what it said is this: the serratus anterior and the other muscles that are attached to the shoulder blade, okay, their entire job is to coordinate essentially the position of the shoulder blade to transfer the energy from the lower half that's generating your fastball or your velocity on your fastball or on your drop ball or whatever pitch you're throwing, to coordinate the position of your shoulder blade and shoulder so that the stresses can go to those positions the most effectively. So you can throw a ball as many times as you want without issues. Okay. So that being said, we need to make sure that those three things are happening. Now, I don't want to leave the podcast without giving you at least a few exercises, okay, to kind of take care of all of those things. So let me pull those up. Okay, so we talked about posture. We talked about posture first, right? So there's an exercise that's on my YouTube channel. Okay. And by the way, if you go down in the show notes, I believe there should be a link. If you click the link, it'll ask you for your email. Put your email in there, and I'll send you a list of the exercises that I typically give out to most of the softball pitchers that we work with. Okay. So just make sure you include your email, and then we can send it to you. Okay. So please do that. The first one is an exercise I call the foam roll thoracic spine mobility sequence. Essentially, you lay in a foam roller and you move your arms in different positions. The whole goal is to free up the front side of your shoulder and your pecs, and to teach your shoulder blades to move independent of stress of gravity. Big words for lay on your back, move around. And the key is that when you stand back up, you can obtain a better posture. So that's the first thing we would have you do. Okay. Now, we talked about lumbopelvic control. That's the set. We really need to get improved lumbopelvic control. So one of the things I'm going to have exercises I have almost everybody do is you stand. Okay. And again, this will be on the exercises if you request them. You stand and act like you're standing in a box, a phone booth, so to speak, just a small, rectangular box. And your job is to rotate your lower half. So use your belly button as kind of your target. Your sternum is the other one, is that you're going to rotate your belly button and point it to the right or the left without your sternum moving. And you got to stay within the box. You can't touch the edges of the box. And if you can do that, that's essentially turning your pelvis without dumping water. That's really important. So that's the second exercise I would have you do. The third exercise, and we talk about the serratus anterior muscle, right? This coordination of movement is what we call wall serratus slides. Just go to my YouTube and YouTube that. Matter of fact, I think the other exercises are on there as well. But just this is where you put your arms up against the wall, you slide your arms up, and you're trying to get the shoulder blade to do something specific, and you're supposed to feel it in a specific position. It's essentially at the bottom part of your shoulder blade. Almost everybody's like, oh yeah, I feel it in my lats. It's not really your lat, but who cares? That's the position, okay? You got to be able to do that and feel it in the right position without compromising anything else in regards to posture. So that's the third thing. We talked about those top three things: posture, pelvic control, and your shoulder blade control. Now, I did say that I'd give you one or two exercises in regards to how to train the pec and how the rotator cuff, I think, should be trained. As we train pecs, so the way I like to train pecs in our softball athletes is, remember, the whole pec is a force producer only at the bottom, but when it's going up and over, it's trying to help withstand some of the forces that go through the front side of your shoulder. So what we do is we do a half kneeling. By the way, this exercise is on my YouTube channel as well. You can look it up. Is I have the athlete half kneeling. The band is hooked up behind them. They're going to hold the band or hold their arm in front, kind of that plane of the body position. And they're going to bring the arm all the way over the head, and then all the way back down to the other side. We call them arcs. I believe it's called single arm, half kneeling, band, anterior shoulder arcs. I made it the worst name possible, but there you go. Okay. So, and then you just go up and you go down, and that band should be pretty tight because your pecs are pretty strong, right? And if they're not, then you can keep working up to it. And you don't want to let it pull you back. You want to keep it in that plane of the body. Okay. And that's how we work the pecs. Now, how do we work the rotator cuff? I will tell you this. This is not, most everybody's like, well, how do you train your rotator cuff? How would you do this? How would you do that? I can tell you this. There's a nice little test that we do. And I do it for most of our softball pitcher athletes, which, by the way, are almost everybody, I feel like in the beginning, is this. I have them get onto a pull-up bar, and they hang from a pull-up bar. And they have to be able to hang for at minimum 30 seconds. That's kind of a low bar, no pun intended. But the idea is you have to hang for 30 seconds. If you cannot hang for 30 seconds, I worry about your rotator cuff's ability to control the ball in the socket during that windmill type pitch. Okay. Now, some people can do it and still pitch just fine. Okay, fine. I'll be honest, I use this for my youth athletes more than I do for my college level athletes. And the reason is because in the youth athletes, I need them to have this good strength, this ability to hold the ball in the socket. As we get to being adults, you can overpower this with other muscle groups and good coordination and being really pristine in your mechanics. But in youth, I like to train it this way. Okay, the term is called brachiation, and it's essentially you're just hanging. If you can hang, then it indicates that the shoulder, in a sense, is doing okay at controlling the ball in the socket. If you cannot hang for 30 seconds, then your entire job and entire rotator cuff program is hanging. You have to be able to hang. So that's where we start. Once they can demonstrate a good hanging position, then we start getting into like the rotations and these other things. But realistically, the way I like to train rotator cuff for the softball pitchers is they put their arms, they get in a push-up position, and they're either supposed to reach across and touch the other hand, or touch their elbow, or touch their shoulder, or touch their ribs, or they use a weight and they drag the weight across and back. And the reason I like that is it gets two things. It gets the serratus, booyah, and then two, it works the rotator cuff in a way that it's holding the ball in the socket and it's coordinating movement, because that's what the rotator cuff does. So those are the things that I would recommend if you haven't been doing them, or if you need just kind of a place to start. Those are the main things that I usually give out. Now, I will tell you that I usually add about 2 to 3 more exercises. And then I highly, highly stress, because we already talked about this, right? We already talked about the contribution of the lower half. 63 to 74% of the energy in a pitch comes from the lower half and the trunk. If you are not training the lower half, getting your legs stronger, then you're really, really missing out on the ability to throw a softball better, faster, more efficiently. You need to be able to do that. Okay. Now, if you're looking at what that looks like, email me. We'll get you a program. We can put you in the right direction. There are specific ways to do this depending on your age, gym experience level, weight training experience level, and where you're at in your career. So those things get really nuanced. But realistically, yeah, if you need some help with that, just email us. We'll take care of you. Okay. So I hope that helped. It's nice little, I wouldn't even say this a deep dive into the research, but it's definitely a deeper dive. But we looked at research, we looked at EMGs, we looked at, where is all the energy coming from in throwing the softball hard. And because of all those things, we're able to take from the evidence and from the research and from past research or from past experience to be able to derive a nice little training program, arm care, body care program for our softball pitchers that should keep them performing at high levels and keeping them injury free. So I hope this helps everybody. I'm so excited for this next wave of podcasts that are going to be coming through, because we're going to do a lot of this. We're doing a lot of research dives, and hopefully be able to give you some more research and evidence-based, actionable type things. My whole goal is really to take everything that's out there in the research, to give it to you in a format that's immediately usable, and you just start using it with confidence, knowing that it's been tried, tested, and proven. And so that's what we're trying to get out of these episodes and trying to do with this podcast moving forward. You also notice that we'll have episodes where we're interviewing people. So the interviews are starting to come in now, where we're able to talk to people and interview them, get their stories and how they progressed through their careers, both on the baseball side and the softball side. And there's a few others that are going to be coming up too that I think you'll be interested in as well. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you do enjoy the podcast, please share it. Please rate us and review us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening to your podcast, on Apple, on iTunes. Please do so. That helps us get to a wider audience. That helps us to be able to do more podcast episodes. And we appreciate you taking the time and tuning in. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Athletic Potential Podcast. If you do have questions for the podcast, please visit the website, www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. You'll find a button there to ask your question. Please input your information and your question, and we will answer any and all questions we get. And thank you again for listening. If you do get a chance, please rate and review the podcast. And until next time, thanks.